Tonight on KQED Newsroom, 12 Democratic presidential candidates faced off this week. We'll look at the state of the race amid the growing impeachment inquiry. Also, we'll hear from Bay Area Congressman Ro Khanna, who serves on one of the committees investigating President Trump. Plus, survivors of some of Northern California's most destructive wildfires are up against a key deadline to file claims against PG&E. Good evening and welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Lily Jamali. We begin tonight with the Democratic presidential debate and the impeachment investigation. This week, House Democrats pressed ahead with their impeachment inquiry against President Trump. They interviewed several key witnesses about the president's efforts to persuade Ukraine's leader to investigate former Vice President Joe Biden and his son. Meanwhile, on Tuesday, 12 candidates squared off in a Democratic presidential debate held in Ohio, reflecting her surge in the polls. This time it was Elizabeth Warren facing attacks from her rivals, especially over her support for Medicare for all. She refused to say if she would raise taxes on the middle class to pay for it. Joining me now are KQED Senior Editor for Politics and Government, Scott Schaefer. And joining us via Skype from the nation's capital is Tal Kopin. She's the Washington correspondent for the San Francisco Chronicle. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
And Scott, let's start with you. You were in Washington this week and you spoke with several members of California's congressional delegation. Several of them are players in this impeachment inquiry. What did you learn?
Well, Adam Schiff is, of course, sort of leading the charge here along with Nancy Pelosi, and he's the chair of the House Intelligence Committee. And we met with him after a long meeting he'd had with the Speaker. And he's become the target of Republicans and the president in particular, who are claiming they're attacking the process here, basically. They're not so much defending what the president did on that phone call with the president of Ukraine. They're saying that this is an unfair, illegitimate process in terms there was no House vote on this. This is all happening behind closed doors. And what Adam Schiff described for us is what exactly is happening behind closed doors. And in his telling of it anyway, the Democrats on the panel get an hour of questioning of these witnesses, then the Republicans get an hour, and they go back and forth like that for hours on end. And according to Schiff anyway, all the questions that they want to ask can be asked of these witnesses. So in his telling of it anyway, it's a very fair process, and it will become public once this portion of the behind closed doors part is finished. So there will be, the transcripts released. There will be testimony. Some of these witnesses may come back for public hearings.
And Tal, to you in Washington, Republicans, of course, want to force a vote against Intelligence Chair Adam Schiff, a censure vote. What are the grounds for justifying such a vote?
Well, procedurally, if enough of them sign a petition, then they can force a vote on it. We absolutely expect it to fail. The Democrats will basically vote to table it and they'll move on. But the point that Republicans are arguing is that they say that Adam Schiff is not conducting this fairly, as Scott was just mentioning. They also have taken issue with some of his statements. For example, he has gotten hit by the fact checkers. He made a comment saying that no one had spoken with the whistleblower, essentially, and we found out later that, in fact, the whistleblower had approached his staff and got the advice to go ahead and move forward with the whistleblower complaint, which is the proper procedure, but he had made this comment sort of saying that hadn't occurred. And so they also take issue with the sort of, parody of the phone call that he read as an opening statement in that hearing, over the whistleblower. He made very clear that he was not, verbatim recounting the president's words, but they're hitting him for it, and they're repeating the president's language, accusing him of lying and that type of thing.
Another big development this week, Tal, was the meeting between President Trump and Speaker Pelosi. This was the first time that they had met in months, and it ended in explosive fashion. You had Pelosi saying that with Trump, all roads lead to Putin. What do you make of that?
I mean, it's a pretty remarkable thing for her to say to the president's face. We've heard her say it in press conferences, but she's a woman who respects the political process. She's worked with multiple presidents as a leader of her party. She's generally very respectful of the office, and so for her to sort of take that shot at the president in that meeting, I think, is a bit of an escalation of the relationship you've seen between the two of them. But we also hear from Democrats that the president was insulting her to her face and calling her a third-rate politician or a third-grade politician. The jury's a bit out on what exactly he said. So clearly, for a while there seemed to be a mutual respect between the two of them, at least for the dignity of their office. But as we move forward with this impeachment inquiry, that seems to be fraying quite a bit more than even we've seen in the past.
All right. Well, Scott, you had an opportunity to sit down with one of the freshman Democrats who is in a purple district, Katie Porter of Irvine. She's certainly made a splash in the last year since she got to Washington. But I have to ask, what did she tell you about how this impeachment and her support for this inquiry has affected her chances of winning? Is she worried?
I don't think she's worried at all. She, first of all, was one of the very first freshmen to come out in support of impeachment inquiries. And so I don't think that she's an attorney. She taught law at UC Irvine, so I think she understands the process and the implications of everything pretty well. A lot of these freshmen also, they're not necessarily career politicians. They didn't necessarily run for office because they wanted to make a career out of it. And so the prospect of not getting reelected is not that troubling to some of them. I think Katie Porter just feels this is the right thing to do. Her district, although, yes, it was held by a Republican that she defeated, Orange County is not a particularly friendly place to Donald Trump either. So I think that she feels confident and comfortable being supportive of the inquiry as it goes forward.
Tal, let's also talk about this House resolution on Syria, on the U.S. withdrawal from Syria, obviously spearheaded by President Trump. You had tremendous Republican support for that resolution, bipartisan effort here. Are we starting to see the tide turn in terms of Republican support and backing for President Trump?
I'm not sure how much you can extrapolate from this particular vote. One area we have seen Republicans being willing to vote with Democrats is on some of these military issues. And so we do see a rebuke of the president's foreign policy and military moves, especially in this area. I think this has been one of the strongest rebukes of that to date. It harkens back to what we saw in terms of Saudi Arabia's support for this campaign in Yemen that's causing widespread famine and mass casualties. That was another instance where we saw this. But, you have members like Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, a senator, very close with the president, very vocally against his moves to withdraw from Syria and allow this Turkish invasion. The next day, he's going to go back to defending the president on everything else. So I don't know that you're seeing a flood of Republicans off the sidelines, but certainly on this issue and perhaps broader foreign policy issues, they are not afraid to rebuke the president in this way.
All right. Well, let's turn now to the Democratic debate this week in Ohio. And Scott, we had Elizabeth Warren sort of with a target on her back during that debate. Should she feel threatened by that or flattered?
Well, I don't think she's threatened by it. I mean, she's the target because she appears to be the front runner, or at least with Joe Biden, the co-front runner at this point. And so she probably was expecting a lot of incoming, and she got it. I think by and large, she handled it pretty well. She did have some trouble around the question of how is she going to fund her Medicare for all policy and whether there'd be a middle-class tax increase to fund that. Pete Buttigieg in particular, I think, did a pretty good job of pushing her on that. We didn't hear a lot from Kamala Harris. I mean, she made a point about not talking. Why aren't we talking about women's reproductive health as well? But by and large, this you can see this field sort of narrowing in terms of who's getting attention, how much time did they have during the debate, and it's pretty much come down to Biden, Sanders, Warren, Buttigieg to a certain extent, and a little bit of Kamala Harris. But all these others, have to get their time in, and it just dilutes the whole process. So I think it is hard for viewers and voters to really, take the full measure of these candidates.
Yeah, Tal, how do you think Elizabeth Warren did?
Well, I mean, I think to Scott's point, what we saw on that debate stage was a sort of passing of the mantle, so to speak, of the frontrunner status. And we saw her front and center taking incoming from several candidates. I mean, you saw those candidates who are polling in the single digits. It's Biden, Warren, and Sanders, and then a big gap between the rest of the field. Every single one of them came in knowing that they would have to do something to change their fate. And several of them decided that something was going to be going after Elizabeth Warren. Did she handle every attack perfectly? Maybe not. Did she show that she is capable of withstanding some onslaught? Which arguably, if you're auditioning for the role of going up against Donald Trump, you have to be able
Yeah.
to take some onslaught. So, I mean, she stood up there and she took it. And I think, yeah, I don't think we're going to see anything in the polls that fundamentally shifts the trajectory of this race, which right now has her picking up steam against all her rivals.
Scott, we have to talk about Kamala Harris, and she has definitely seen her star fall. But interesting to see Biden faltering as well these last couple of weeks. How might she be a plan B for some of his base?
Well, for Joe Biden, his firewall has really been African-American voters, especially in places like South Carolina and other states in the South. And so the question is, if Biden continues to drop, where do those votes go? Might they go to Kamala Harris or Cory Booker, the two African-Americans in the race, or could they go to Elizabeth Warren? I mean, I think those votes will very much be up for grabs, and we're going to see that dynamic play out in the next few weeks.
All right. Scott Schaefer, our politics editor here at KQED, and Tal Koppen with the San Francisco Chronicle in Washington. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
3 House committees are spearheading the impeachment investigation into President Trump. One of them, the Oversight and Reform Committee, deposed several current and former Trump administration officials this week. Meanwhile, on Thursday, Mick Mulvaney, the president's acting chief of staff, suggested at a press conference that nearly $400 million in military aid to Ukraine was held up to pressure Ukraine to investigate Democrats. Hours later, Mulvaney tried to walk those comments back, saying there was no quid pro quo for the release of the aid. With us now is Silicon Valley Congressman Ro Khanna. He serves on the House Oversight and Reform Committee and the Armed Services Committee. Thank you for being here, Congressman.
Thank you so much for having me on.
I want to begin by asking you about Mick Mulvaney's press conference yesterday, in which he suggested that there was, in fact, a quid pro quo with Ukraine. What's your reaction to that, and how does that impact the impeachment inquiry?
It was shocking to have the White House Chief of Staff admitting that the United States of America withheld aid from Ukraine to advance the president's personal agenda. I mean, the president is asking Ukraine to investigate a conspiracy theory that Ukraine somehow allegedly helped the Democratic Party win elections in 2016. That's absurd. It's been debunked. And yet the president is tying our aid, asking Ukraine to do that. It's wrong. It's further evidence of the abuse of office of this administration.
Are you planning to call Mr. Mulvaney as a witness?
We certainly will. I don't know if he will testify or cooperate. But at this point, we don't need that many more witnesses. We've had the chief of staff admit to quid pro quo on television. We've had the president of the United States brag about asking Ukraine and China to investigate Joe Biden and Hunter Biden. At this point, there really is no factual dispute. We know that what the administration did, and the question is, are we going to uphold our constitutional values or not?
Congressman, of all the testimony that you heard this week, what was the single most important thing that we learned in your view?
Well, based on the public reporting of the testimony, I would say the most disturbing part is how this president outsourced foreign policy to his personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, for his personal benefit. I mean, this was not foreign policy being conducted by John Bolton or Mike Pompeo or our ambassadors. This was Rudy Giuliani pushing his own interests and the president's personal interests to win re-election with Ukraine. And that's just every American, I don't care about your party, should be appalled that a personal lawyer to the president is representing the United States of America in weighty foreign policy matters.
What does the timeline at this point look like, in your view, when it comes to impeachment, on a vote to impeach? Does Thanksgiving seem like it's in the ballpark at this point?
I think it is. We need to get it done before the end of the year. Like I said, most of the evidence is there. We need to move expeditiously. And then we also need to focus on the work. I mean, I have been focused on building affordable housing and getting grants of affordable housing for the Bay Area and expanding transportation and BART and making sure that we have investments in infrastructure and jobs. Obviously, I'm going to hold this president accountable, but then I also want to be focused on the work to improve our district and people's lives.
Let's turn to Syria now and the Trump administration's withdrawal of U.S. forces there. In the past week, we have seen Kurds displaced, with Turkey annexing parts of Syria. The Kurds, of course, have been one of America's key allies in the battle against Islamic State. Yesterday, Vice President Mike Pence announced that Turkey had agreed to a temporary ceasefire. So, Congressman, I want to ask you, does that ceasefire do anything in terms of undoing the damage done in this very fragile region?
Unfortunately, it doesn't. I mean, it's not a ceasefire. Turkey is describing it as a pause. Obviously, it's good that the violence has stopped. But the question is, what's going to happen to the 1.7 million Kurds? The president is saying, go flee. Turkey is saying, go flee. Well, that's unacceptable. They have a vibrant society in northern Syria. We can't just have a mass exodus. And then what happens after the 5 days? Does Turkey go back in and start killing women and children and civilians again? So what we need is far more pressure on Turkey to come up with a permanent commitment not to invade that region.
We have to note here, Congressman, that in April, you and Kentucky Senator Rand Paul sent a letter to President Trump supporting the president's decision at that time to bring U.S. troops home from Syria. You urged the completion of that withdrawal over a 6-month timeline. That was exactly 6 months ago.
I did, but I called for a responsible withdrawal. And in my Washington Post op-ed, I said, let's make sure that we have diplomacy, that we have a deal with Erdogan so that we don't have him make an invasion. And let's make sure that we secure the Kurds and secure the regional interests. The president didn't do any of that. He didn't even inform our allies. He didn't inform the Kurds. He didn't inform his own administration in parts, and he basically ceded to Erdogan. So I do think a responsible withdrawal is possible. It's still my position, but not without diplomacy.
Do you have any regrets about sending that letter now? Because you're right that you did call for an orderly process, but this happened almost exactly on the timeline that you had asked for.
No, I have no regrets. What I have a regret for is that we don't have a competent foreign policy and that we don't have people like Richard Holbrooke or George Shultz who would have been able to do this. I have no doubt if Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, or any competent Democrat was president, they'd be able to withdraw our troops and also make sure that we'd have the effective diplomacy.
I want to ask you about the resolution passed in the House of Representatives on Monday on a 354-60 vote. This is a rebuke, no doubt about it, of the president's withdrawal from Syria. Are you surprised by the bipartisan support on this issue?
I'm not. I mean, you had progressives like me support it, even though we're for withdrawal. We believe that the handout to Turkey and allowing for the slaughter of the Kurds was irresponsible. And you have conservatives who believe we should be standing up with our Kurdish allies and not allow for a resurgence of ISIS supporting it. So the one consensus in Congress is whatever ideological perspective you come from, this has been incompetent. It's been a colossal blunder that is costing people their lives.
Congressman, we know on Thursday that President Trump has chosen his own resort, one of his resorts in Florida, as the location of the next G7 next year. Can we get your reaction to that?
It's shocking. I mean, I don't understand how this president can be selling his own business as a place to conduct official policy. It's a violation of the emoluments clause. And he says it's not about money. So I tweeted out, I said, okay, if it's not about money, why doesn't he offer these places for free? But why is he having the taxpayers reimburse him, his private businesses, for these spaces?
Is there anything that Congress can do to stop this?
Well, we're calling for investigations and we're saying he's violating the emoluments clause, but how many things can we investigate? We're focused on the biggest abuses and having a process of the articles of impeachment.
Let's turn to the passage, the death of your good friend, Representative Elijah Cummings. You served together on the House Oversight Committee. How is his death being received in Washington?
It's an enormous loss. I would describe him more as a mentor than a friend. I had the honor of serving with him for about a year on the Oversight Committee. He's a son of sharecroppers, a civil rights icon, a man who had a booming presence, a moral authority that very few others in Congress have. I think of people like John Lewis and Elijah Cummings as having had the moral weight, moral conscience of Congress. He won't be replaceable, but we can learn from his wisdom, his sense of fairness to both sides, his sense of commitment to civil rights, to rights of immigrants. And I just feel blessed and privileged to have learned from him and served on his committee for a year.
All right, well, our condolences to you and your colleagues there in Washington. Congressman Ro Khanna, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure.
Survivors of recent California wildfires linked to PG&E's equipment have until Monday to file liability claims for their losses. Also, the state's top utility regulator is holding an emergency meeting today with PG&E executives about the widely criticized power outages last week that left hundreds of thousands of customers without power. Governor Gavin Newsom is demanding accountability, saying this week that, quote, Californians should not pay the price for decades of PG&E's greed and neglect. Joining me now to talk about this is law professor Jared Elias from UC Hastings College of the Law. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So there's this deadline on Monday, and before we get started, I want to put up the website for folks who do want to file claims who haven't. It's pgewildfireinfo.com. And I think it's really interesting that if you don't get your claim in by this Monday, you basically forfeit your claim. So my first question to you is, why does this deadline exist in the first place?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So when you think about bankruptcy law, it's easy to focus on, especially in this case, the wildfire victims whose lives were upended by fires that have been attributed to PG&E equipment. But the company itself needs finality, and they need to be able to move through the bankruptcy process. And the judge needs to know just exactly what is it sitting in front of him. And so because of that, bankruptcy law has these harsh rules where it's harsh. If you don't file a claim by 5 o'clock on Monday, you're more than likely forfeiting any rights that you might have had to get anything from PG&E for any damages that you suffered. And to the extent that you were harmed by PG&E related fires and you don't file a claim, you're going to be out of luck, even if the person who lived next door to you, who did file a claim and who also suffered damages, gets a huge payment on account of it. So you really do need to file a claim by that date.
And we know that tens of thousands of people have filed claims, but there could be tens of thousands of people who haven't yet. And I'm really surprised by that figure. It might be as much as half of those out there who still haven't done so. Why do you think that is?
So that's a great question, and you're hearing a couple of different stories from the people who have been looking at it. One possibility is that there's just misinformation going around and people don't understand that they need to file a claim. The company has done a really great job, I think, in advertising that you need to do it, but it's a legal form. It's intimidating. This is a process that people aren't familiar with, and I can understand how you would look at this and say, I'm just not sure what to do. Another possibility is people might think that if they file a claim, they have to know exactly how much they're owed. They have to have scientific proof of that this is the number. Actually, the company has done something great, which is you can just check a box on the form saying you're not sure how much you know, and you can amend the form later once you learn more about what your damages are. So there's no real reason not to file a claim. You just have to put your name on it, explain what happened to you, and you can check the box saying I'm not sure, and later you can figure it out and amend it, but you need to do it by 5 o'clock on Monday.
There are a lot of misconceptions, and you touched on some of them just now. One of the questions I've heard consistently from people is, do I need a lawyer to do this? What do you tell people?
So it's always helpful to have a lawyer in life, and I say that as a lawyer, but it's always helpful to have a lawyer to help you with things. But you don't need a lawyer to help you with this form. You just need to go online and fill it out. It's great if you have a lawyer, and it's also great if you consult with a lawyer while you're filling it out yourself. But if you don't have time to do that between now and Monday, fill out the form and then work with a lawyer later to amend it and fix any mistakes you might have made.
And we should note that the liabilities from these wildfires are the primary reason that PG&E cited when they entered into bankruptcy protection at the end of January. Today, we have the state regulator, the California Public Utilities Commission, calling executives from PG&E in. So we're talking about the CEO, also the chairwoman of the board, and a number of executives as well. And I just wonder, how much of this is going to influence the bankruptcy process? Because what they're talking about today is these controversial power outages from last week. Do you think that this could influence the bankruptcy proceedings, that conversation that we hear today?
Oh, absolutely. but in a subtle way. So, the bankruptcy judge, Judge Montali, is a very experienced judge. He's been doing this for over 30 years, and he really is good at being a bankruptcy judge. But you have, this incredibly important company that is in your courtroom and they need help. And they're under siege from the press, they're under siege from the public of California, the state government, the regulator. All of this kind of adds up to a landscape for Judge Montali where he looks at PG&E and he thinks, I need to do something to help move this company on so we can focus on these bigger challenges that it faces. Because the fire conditions and the shutoffs, like, these are not things that Judge Montali or this bankruptcy can fix. These are things that the company is going to have to work through later. And I think it sort of shows in the grand scheme of things how unimportant in some ways this bankruptcy process is for PG&E's future. It's really important for the fire victims that happened in the past, but this company, once it leaves bankruptcy, it's not like it's going to be, rainbows and unicorns and all of their problems are coming to an end. This is a really tough situation.
Why should ratepayers pay attention to this? I mean, I think a lot of us are wondering, at the end of the day, are our rates going to go up?
So ratepayers should pay attention to this. As a PG&E ratepayer myself, I certainly think about it in that sense. And what will probably happen is your rates are not going to go up right away after the bankruptcy, but after this ends, the problems that PG&E has will continue to force rates up and up and up, you would assume, over time, absent some dramatic change in their cost of doing business, which only seems like it's going up. So if you're a ratepayer, you can kind of like cover your eyes and hope that nothing bad happens. But it's not this bankruptcy that's going to force rates up in the future. It's all of the business problems that PG&E faces.
Yeah, problems that the governor and other state officials are saying were years in the making, were the product of neglect and choices made by the company. Help us contextualize this bankruptcy. In the grand scheme, this is the biggest utility bankruptcy that this country has ever seen. How unique is this case?
This has to be, and I'm a scholar of bankruptcy, and before I became a professor, I was a bankruptcy lawyer. This has to be, if not the most unique bankruptcy that we've seen, it's one of them. We've seen a lot of companies that had very unique bankruptcy cases, like General Motors. That was very unique in 2009. The city of Detroit had a unique bankruptcy case. This is unusual, and it's unusual in that the bankruptcy judge really doesn't have the power to solve all the problems that PG&E has. There's a sort of powerlessness of the bankruptcy system over this company, and that just makes this really strange.
All right. Well, Jared Elias, professor at UC Hastings College of the Law, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
And that will do it for us. As always, you can find more of our coverage at kqed.org/newsroom. I'm Lily Jamali. Thanks for joining us.